Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for attending today's webinar, Perfecting the Recipe, the 5 Key Ingredients of Performance Development. My name is Dina Kwasik, and I'm a member here at TalentQuest. I'm on the communications team. We're so excited to spend the next hour with you discussing performance development. Before we get started, I do want to go over just a few housekeeping items. After the presentation, time for questions and answers. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and use the question box that appears at the top right of your screen. Send your questions over, and Adrianne will be happy to answer them at the end of the session. Second, the SHRM PDC code will be given out at the conclusion of the webinar as well. You will earn 1 credit for attending today's webinar. And then lastly, we will also be forwarding a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the recording of today's presentation to everyone within the next few business days. So without further ado, today our presentation will be given by Adrianne McVeigh, the Executive Director of Executive Assessment Solutions here at TalentQuest. Adrianne is a business psychologist with over 7 years of experience as a consultant in the talent management space. She has a great presentation today, so I'd like to welcome her and turn everything over to her. Welcome, Adrianne.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you. So I think you covered all the logistics regarding our presentation today, but I want to welcome everybody and appreciate you joining us after the lunch hour. So perfecting the recipe and talking about key ingredients is appropriate since most of us, at least in the Eastern time zone, are coming right off of lunch, but I'm going to try and keep you awake. I'll apologize in advance in case I clear my throat a few times. I think I've got a bug or something like that from one of my kids, so I'm trying to keep that to a minimum so you don't have to hear it. But today we are talking about performance development, and what I know a lot of companies and a lot of organizations are focused on this, are trying to better understand, what is the right thing to do in terms of performance development, what are the best practices, and so I wanted to share with you today some of the key ingredients. So if you're focused and you include and sort of think about these key ingredients, you can get the most out of your performance development process in your organization. And I look forward to answering any questions you have at the end of the presentation, as Dina said. So please feel free to ask questions. Kind of makes the presentation a little more interesting for everybody involved. So before I get too much into what those 5 key ingredients are, I'll leave you hanging for a minute. I want to make the case for a minute around why performance development is important, why you should care, why we should care about performance development. And the case that I'm going to make is really based on the link between performance management or performance development and engagement. So there's a study out there that looks at approximately 300 companies that are well known for high levels of employee engagement and just excellent in terms of talent management. And this study surveyed these companies, or from differing industries and sizes and whatnot, and said, what are you doing to drive employee engagement in your company? And as you can see, 70% of these companies said, we're doing performance reviews, which means goal setting, feedback, clarification, and that was kind of critical to their driving engagement in their companies. You'll also see many of those companies were doing things like skill training, recognition programs, just making sure that employees were getting positive feedback around their efforts and accomplishments. They were focused on team building and just feedback programs in general. You might say, what's the difference between feedback programs and performance reviews? In many cases, performance reviews incorporate goal setting and more accountability and such. So a lot of good companies in the space that do well in terms of engagement are focused on performance reviews, performance management. And there's 3 key drivers of engagement out there. And I think performance development impacts each one of these drivers. First, there's connection, so an employee's connection to their boss, to their company, and to their job. If you're having good performance development conversations and meetings, it certainly enhances that connection between the employee and their manager. And also, recognition is key. If you're having those conversations, then you're more than likely talking about what's going well and providing good feedback around the employee's efforts. And then finally, there's performance development, or a focus on development, on feedback, and on professional growth. So financially, you know, oftentimes when if you work in an organization and you're trying to make the case for whether it's spending more of your budget on performance development, getting a new sort of system to manage that or whatnot, you need to be able to make the case not just in terms of, oh, it'll make everyone feel good and be more engaged here, but the people making the decisions want to know how that impacts the bottom line. And so this slide is really focused on how performance discussions and performance development enhances the bottom line. What's the real financial incentive for doing this? And here are some powerful statistics. And again, these are around companies that have enhanced levels of engagement, which is greatly impacted by performance development. So those companies with high levels of engagement tend to see 33% less absenteeism, which is a huge financial gain for any company. They tend to see 28% higher gross margins, 3.5 greater earnings per share, 19% increase in operating income over previous year, and 18% higher productivity. So financially, there's all sorts of incentive for focusing on performance development and sort of really caring and thinking about engagement. And Best Buy is actually an example of a company that really sort of demonstrated this connection. So higher employee engagement scores at Best Buy did lead to better store performance. The company found that for every 1/10 of a point it boosted employee engagement, its store saw a $100,000 increase in operating income annually. And so the results are real. And I think even if your company is doing pretty well financially, focusing on performance development and enhancing engagement can really help bring your company to the next level. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll here and see if this works. I'm just sort of curious as to those that are on the call or on the webinar today, where are you and your company at in terms of performance development? What's your current approach? And so, I'm good? Okay, so you should see the question is, what description best fits your organization's current approach to performance development? And the options are, 1, we don't have a formal process for feedback or performance reviews, which, you know, so I've seen it many a time. It's not a real opportunity for many companies, but they just haven't gotten there yet. 2 is we conduct annual performance reviews and have those meetings as part of our process. 3, we have annual reviews and mid-year check-ins, so we sort of try and follow up midway through the year. And 4, you're in a place where you've really established a feedback-rich culture. You've instituted processes and expectations to make feedback part of your daily interaction. So it's really part of your everyday.
All right, everyone, if you've had a chance to vote, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in just a second. So go ahead and cast your vote, and we will share the results with you.
Okay. Now, Dina, I can't really see the results on my end, so are you going to share them with us?
Yes.
Great.
So now we're back to it. We're going to be doing your presentation.
Okay.
And it says here we have 9% people on our webinar today have voted that we do not have a formal process.
Okay.
45% have voted that we do conduct an annual performance review.
Mm-hmm.
Another 45% said that they conduct annual reviews as well as their mid-year reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And then our last poll is we have a feedback-rich culture, and feedback is constant. Nobody voted for that.
No, interesting, interesting. Okay. Well, that's kind of in line with where I think a lot of companies are. So I'm not too surprised by those percentages. But what I will tell you is, as we talk here about best practices and where companies are going, I think you'll realize that there may be a case for the final option, making feedback a part of your everyday culture. So when you think about some of the companies that are really on the cutting edge of performance development, performance management, you may have seen articles or heard things like performance management's dead, or we're turning it upside down. And there's a lot of top companies, the Container Stores, Zappos, et cetera, that are sort of claiming to have really rejigged performance management. What they're doing is they're making performance management instead more a focus on consistent feedback, on having regular conversations, on communication. So it's less about ratings and more about the conversations and the feedback. At the Container Store, for example, one of their guiding principles is communication is leadership. And so they try and really live that through their performance management practices by having frequent feedback be a part of their, even daily and definitely weekly process with employees. They make performance management not an annual event, but a regular one. And they're trying to really just create transparency, improve individual and team performance on a regular basis. And so I think that's really what I've been encouraging more and more companies that I've worked with around performance development to do, is to make this a part of their regular daily and weekly process. And if you think about it, the average employee works, if you're a 40-hour-a-week employee, you work approximately 2,080 hours a week. To think that 1 hour per year is going to make a huge dent is a bit naive, I think. We have to, it's great to have that structure and to have those formal conversations and meetings built in. I think they're needed, but we need to make sure those are supported by ongoing feedback, check-ins, etc. All right. So what is performance development? Really, in simplistic terms, it's an ongoing process of communication, really the focus being on communication between a supervisor and an employee, a manager and an employee. It happens throughout the year, and it's in support of the bigger goals for the organization, or some folks might call that their success plan for the organization. If it's done right, it can be simple, it's a habit, it's a way of operating that really helps our employees to feel engaged and do their best, as opposed to just checking a box. All right. So what's the benefit? Who really wins when you do performance development right? A lot of times we think about the employee, but I think it's more broad than that. The manager and the organization tend to benefit a lot too. All right. So the employee, how do they benefit? In a number of ways. First of all, having those regular conversations, talking and clarifying around goals, things like that, helps the employee know, hey, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I spending all this time and energy on the right things, or am I wasting it? Because nothing's more demoralizing than working really hard on something and then being told, oh, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. That's very frustrating. So it helps them know that they're doing the right thing. Also, it helps them sort of link what they're focused on with the company's vision and goals, which is really engaging. People tend to feel more connected to the organization when they see how they help impact the bigger goals. And what else? Those conversations, when it comes to performance development, help with course corrections, so you don't go too far down a path and realize it's the wrong one. And also give the employee a chance to sort of see, is anyone recognizing how hard I'm working, or even have a chance to sort of share how hard they're working so their manager knows. Oftentimes these conversations tend to lead to discussion of what's next for that person, what does their development or the next steps in their career look like, and so that certainly helps with engagement as well. All right. How does a manager benefit? In a number of different ways. Through these conversations, the manager comes to find out, by asking good questions, what really motivates my employee? And you might ask questions like, what work do you really enjoy? What gets you energized, excited? What do you feel most proud of? So you might learn more about their motivations through that. You learn what sort of frustrates them, what they dislike about their work and their role. You'll get to know by asking the right questions too if you and your employee are on the same page. So by asking them, hey, what's gone well lately, or what do you consider some of your strengths, or what's not going so well, what are some of the challenges you're having, where do you feel like you need to work on things. And if, as a result of those answers, you realize that you're pretty closely aligned in terms of where you see the person and where they see themselves, then you're starting from a different place. So you can now start, okay, yep, that looks like your strengths and your sort of issues to work on. Let's brainstorm some ways to make progress. But if you get into that, that discussion and realize they have a very different view of themselves than I have of them, there's going to be a lot more work on your part as a manager to help them sort of see that gap between perhaps their intentions and their impact, or sort of how they see themselves and what's really happening. And you have to bridge that gap before you can move on to solutions. It says here, what am I accountable for? And you might be like, well, why does that say that under the manager? Well, having good performance development discussions means that the manager knows what they're accountable for in terms of developing their people. So you need to be aware of, what are the areas of weakness or places that my employees need to grow, and you need to hold yourself accountable as a manager for supporting them and providing them the resources and opportunities to build in those areas. It's your chance to sort of ask the employee how you can support them, and as I mentioned before, you can recognize issues sooner and sort of course correct. The organization benefits too, and from a big picture, the benefit is that there's more sort of unity of vision and efforts. So if you have good communication and performance development in place, there's typically cascading goals between what the organization's strategy and overall goals are and how those relate to each role and each employee. And if there's changes in terms of culture or strategy or approach, having that good performance development and communication in place helps those things happen in a much more agile manner, or quick manner, than if those didn't exist. You get to know what your gaps are in terms of skills, needed training, and things like that in order to move the company forward towards its goals. And in the end, as I mentioned before, when I was making the case, the company benefits from performance development in terms of engagement, productivity, and in the end, cash, financial performance. All right, so I've kind of made the case on why it's important, who benefits from it, and now I'm kind of curious as to why you were interested in learning a little bit more about performance development. So let's see if we have some answers to this next poll. Why are you interested in performance development in general? 1, we want managers and employees to be more aligned on goals and expectations. 2, we want to increase engagement among employees. 3, we want to enhance feedback and communication in our culture. 4, we need more structure and process to support high performance and results. And 5, we can't pass up a free webinar. Add that joke in for the fun of it. And you may really agree with all of these reasons, 1 through 4, but pick the one that was more so the driving interest for you, or that sort of you most align with. I'll give you a minute to respond to that poll and see where people come out. All right. Okay, let's see what we have, Dina.
All right. I was able to share the results. I think you guys should be able to see that on your screen, but it shows that 27% checked, we want managers and employees to be more aligned on goals. 14% said we want to increase engagement among employees.
That was 14, okay.
45% said that we want to enhance feedback and communication in our culture.
Okay.
And 14% said we need more structure to support high performance.
Okay, and who said they wanted a free webinar?
Good job. Good job, everyone.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and move this back to your presentation.
All right, thanks, Dina. Okay, so that's kind of helpful to know. In terms of aligning employees and managers on goals and expectations, I'll sort of expand on that in a minute, but you'd be surprised how ambiguous and unclear that can be. Especially in fast-moving companies, in places where people tend to wear many hats, or where priorities really change depending on the situation and the context. And so having more regular communication and having a formal process as well keeps that updated and relevant in terms of that alignment between goals and expectations. All right. So key ingredients. How can you really approach the performance development process so you get the most out of it? And there's a number of things to consider. And this kind of speaks to that alignment between employee and manager in terms of goals and expectations. Doing everything that you can to ensure clarity is one of the things that drives success in terms of performance development, because these discussions add clarity around what the employee is supposed to be doing. They sort of, and in terms of goals, you might have performance goals, things that the employee is responsible for that are very easily measured, that help drive the success of them and their role and of the organization. And those are sort of a contract between the employee and the manager. They provide sort of a framework for accountability, and they promote conversations between the manager and employee to monitor progress throughout the year. Those are things that we can come back to and say, how are we doing on those? Are we making progress? Are we static? Are we falling behind? You want to make sure, I'm sure many of you have heard of this, but you want to make sure those goals are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. And the question that I always tell people to ask themselves when they're thinking about goals is make sure that you and your employee know what success would look like. So, you can't just say, let's make sure that employees are happier in our department. What does that look like? You have to define that in terms of behaviors, results, all those sorts of things. Clarity also refers to priorities. So oftentimes these performance development discussions and communication are very helpful to the employee because they may have a lot on their plate, and the conversations help to determine what's really important here. I can't do everything at once. What's the priority? What should I really be working on? And make sure that the expectations are clear too. When I've given presentations on this in the past to various companies, one thing I often do is just have them imagine, especially if you wear glasses or contacts, imagine that you woke up one morning and I told you, okay, you can't wear your glasses or your contacts all day. I need you to go about your day as you normally would, but you basically can't see very much and everything's fuzzy. And it feels bad, and it's confusing, you don't move very quickly, you have less confidence around what you're doing and where you're going. And then I sort of tell them to imagine putting them back on. And that is what life is like when you have clarity around goals, priorities, and expectations. So think about your employees. You want to make sure that they have their glasses on when they're moving forward in their jobs, in their daily responsibilities. You want them to be focused, to have a guiding vision and a plan, and without that, people tend to drift. And you really, a lot of managers say, well, I have some problem employees, and they're causing me issues, they're not working hard enough, they're letting the team down. Without clear goals and expectations, you can't hold them accountable. You can't go back and say you did or didn't do this, and we need to sort of make a solution to improve things. So they really are a tool for the manager and sort of a helpful guide and compass for the employee. Now you want to think too about what are some of the tools that you might use to enhance clarity for your employees. And some of you may be already sort of clients of ours in terms of using goal setting and performance development modules, but that's certainly an option to sort of automate the process, have all the information in one place, makes things a lot easier. Be happy to talk to you about how to use goal setting in terms of software and things like that and make it work for your company. What's the second ingredient that drives success in performance development? Is balance. And I'm thinking about balance in reference to two things. One is between positive and negative feedback. And you know, I think that sharing positive feedback is probably the one that people tend to underestimate in terms of importance. I hear a lot of managers say things like, well, you know, and especially from the baby boomer generation, you know, if my employee's doing well, they're not going to hear from me. If you're in trouble or causing issues or not doing your job, well, that's when you're going to hear from me. And I feel like that's very short-sighted because those managers are missing a real opportunity and not using a tool that is very powerful for them. And some of the statistics out there would support that. So 78% of American workers say that being recognized motivates them in their job. And 69% say that they would work harder if their efforts were better recognized. And think back to, you know, when you were a kid, you know, all the way up until your current job or, you know, your first job, when you were working really hard and doing something and someone said, hey, you know, good job, really good presentation last week, or, man, you handled that client request really well. I know that was a challenge. It feels good. And when it feels good, you want to do more of it. So it's one of the most powerful tools I think people can use, and they need to use more of it. My motto is to catch people doing good and to recognize that. There's other studies out there too that say, you know, money's nice, but attention, recognition, a chance to learn new skills, all of those things are the keys to keeping top performers. And employees are going to be more hesitant to make a jump if they feel like they're part of a family, part of a team that's investing in them and providing positive feedback and opportunities. So give as much positive feedback as you do negative, and really try and encourage the things that you want to see more of. That tends to be more effective than telling people what you don't want to see. Now, when I say balance across time, what am I talking about there? There's a joke, there's a cartoon out there, I think it's a Dilbert, where Dilbert's joking with his coworker about and saying, geez, you're working really hard this week. Is your performance review on Monday? And, you know, there's some cynicism that people, you know, might work harder, you know, the closer they come to performance review time, thinking that their manager is just going to focus on the most recent events and efforts that they've seen. But a manager can do more justice to the employee by, especially when it comes to those formal review meetings, making sure that their evaluation and their commentary looks at the employee across the course of time since their last conversation. And I'll say this, don't rely on your memory in terms of outlining how well the employee achieved their the goals and expectations. We tend to sort of do a better job of remembering the bad stuff, forgetting the good stuff, and some of us have a tendency to remember the recent or just the more dramatic things. And so one of the tools that you can use is a performance journal. We certainly have that available in our sort of software, but there's options to do that on your own too. Keep a record and a journal on each of your employees, and if you're an employee, which most of us are, keep it on yourself, on accomplishments, on major efforts that you've made, good feedback that you've received from customers and colleagues, and things that you've sort of been challenged with and what you've learned from those situations, so that you can provide a balanced perspective when it comes time for that conversation as well. That mutual documentation helps keep everyone's focus balanced and focused on the job as opposed to the person. All right. So relationship. Performance management is seen by a lot of folks as a key vehicle for building engagement and strengthening the relationship between an employee and their direct supervisor or manager. And there's a few things that performance development can do if you do it right in terms of relationship. Trust is really that foundation. So by having regular conversations and establishing an environment of trust, that employee's going to feel, or both parties really are going to feel more safe. You're going to establish an implicit message that you each have each other's best interest in mind. And that's why employees can actually accept criticism and anger even from a boss they trust. It's much easier to accept feedback and criticism and be open when you feel like the person is in your corner versus when you feel like that person might have an ulterior motive or isn't supportive of you. There's a few strategies, I think, if you're a manager, to take note of in terms of what you can do to enhance trust. One of the major things you can do is to simply express belief in an employee, in their potential, in their ability to overcome challenges, and their ability to take on new responsibilities. You know, oftentimes that's one of the biggest roles managers play, is seeing potential and helping to support that person until they can see it themselves. And another thing that you can do as a manager to build trust is to not lecture or tell, but ask questions. So really focus on not being directive and being the expert or the know-it-all, but help employees by asking the right questions so they start to think about it themselves. Also listening, active listening is one thing you can do to establish trust, because it conveys respect, it conveys interest and value for the employee and what they have to say. And then delegate. If you're doing things for other people and taking over, you're communicating that you don't trust them. So delegate and support them. And then finally, when it comes to really establishing that trust, managers can model openness and show that it's a two-way street by asking for feedback themselves. So I'd really highly recommend for managers to, in conversation with employees, ask them, hey, what's one thing I could do to be a better manager, to be more supportive of you? And when you hear that feedback, simply ask any clarifying questions you have and thank them. Don't explain anything. Get the sort of good feedback or constructive feedback and thank them for it, and just tuck that away, file it away, and think about how you can apply it. In terms of support, employees really rely on their managers for career development and guidance in terms of how to improve their skills, and trust really allows for the employee to ask for the support they need and to be vulnerable in saying, hey, I'm having trouble with this, or I'm not feeling very successful in this area. Okay. So then for the manager, it's your job to ask what you can offer in terms of support, and for the employee, you need to be assertive in asking for what you need. When I say two-way street, I want to just really emphasize that the performance development process is not a conversation where something is being done to an employee. It's a chance for a two-way discussion. And so the employee should be talking at least as much as the manager in those discussions. And some of the questions that should be coming up in those discussions are, what's going well, what's not going so well, how are we doing in terms of our communication, do you have the tools that you need to be successful, how can I support you, what are you interested in, what do you love doing? Really empower the employee to have a voice. That sense of ownership and control influences engagement. And the employee, we strongly recommend that in terms of formal processes, that the employee complete a self-review also. So you can have them be thinking about their strengths and opportunities and see how closely they're aligned with the manager's perspective. All right, so here's a Dilbert for you. Keep it light. Let you have a chance to read through that. So sort of funny, but some of you might relate to this as being a little bit more close to reality than it should be, because some companies really do approach performance development in terms of checking a box. All right, filled out that form, schedule the meeting, have the conversation, and it's not really part of their culture. It is really fulfilling a specific goal or need, again, checking a box, but not really sort of living the values of the culture. And I think that's really one of the ingredients to success in terms of performance development, is making that feedback and that communication part of the fabric of everything that you do in your organization. And you can do that in a number of ways, and feedback is most helpful and communication is most helpful with employees in terms of performance development when you use examples, you're really as specific and detailed as possible, you think about actionable feedback, it's about what you can do about it and sort of change for next time. And when managers and colleagues think about their feedback, frame it in a way so other people can hear it well, and they're thoughtful about how they're packaging it so that it comes across and is digested as well as possible. That certainly helps. And making it frequent and timely is also really critical. That last one, frequent and timely, is pretty important. So I'm sort of urging everyone to be immediate. The adult brain learns best when you're caught in action. And think about it. I mean, if you wait 3 months to tell someone that his or her performance is average, or that they didn't do so well in a meeting, or then they usually can't remember well enough or grasp the changes needed in order to change direction. It's too ambiguous. You're relying on someone's memory, which is often faulty. And so productive feedback requires that you give it frequently and as soon as possible so that they can also bring their minds back to that specific example or situation and say, oh, yeah, you're right. I did kind of, put that client on the defensive by bringing up the situation in that way. Yeah, you're right. Probably should have done something different. And if you make performance development, if you make feedback a part of the fabric of an organization's culture, you overcome one of the biggest barriers to feedback that I think many managers have, which is, well, I just kind of avoid feedback because I don't want people to feel bad, and I certainly don't want, we have some turnover here, so I don't want them to sort of focus too much on that and end up leaving. If you make it just part of the everyday, if you're thoughtful about how you give it and you focus on balancing it and such, then it's just part of what you do, and it's not as big of a deal. There's a study out there that looked at highly engaged employees and low engaged employees and compared how much feedback they were getting, like how frequently they were getting it. And when you compare the two groups, the highly engaged employees were getting feedback, 43% of that group was getting feedback at least once a week. And when you looked at the low engaged employees, only 18% of them were getting feedback once a week. So there's definitely a connection between, again, that engagement and how often they're getting feedback. So make the most of it by giving it as much as you can and trying to sort of go beyond making it an annual occurrence. As I mentioned before, the biggest thing that managers and leaders in an organization can do to make it part of the culture is to model it. So ask for feedback, seek it out, try and act on the feedback that you get, and be good listeners when you're getting the feedback. Okay, the final key ingredient to performance development, I titled this one growth. It's focusing the feedback and the communication around growth and being forward-thinking or forward-focused, more future-oriented in nature. So the most effective feedback focuses not on what went wrong in the past, but on what can go right in the future. And when you do it that way, and it's pretty easy to reformat it, it's typically interpreted as encouragement and a boost forward rather than something that kind of stops an employee in their tracks and makes them feel bad. And when I say positive, you'll see that in the screen there, I'm not saying that you should sugarcoat your feedback or, not share some of the tough stuff. I think you do have to do that, but make sure that it's constructive and helpful. Emphasize solutions rather than problems, and that's going to help the person be much more accepting of the feedback because they're going to have some ideas for how to complete the task, make changes, and deliver the results that are expected of them. So they're just going to feel more empowered and supported in terms of moving forward. And an example is, instead of saying something like, let's say you have an employee who's just not really showing very good executive presence. They haven't been very assertive or active in the last few meetings you've been with them in. And so, some managers might say, hey, you've hardly said a word in the last 3 meetings I've been in with you. That might put the employee in the defensive, and that can reduce their receptivity to feedback. But say something more specific and positive around what you want to see. Just say, you know what, Jason, I know you want to move on to the next level, and I know you're smart. You've clearly got something to say. You've been here for 5 years, and I want others to benefit from that. So one thing I think you can do to show that and make sure that other people are seeing it is speak up in meetings. I'd love to hear at least one opinion from you in every meeting we're in together going forward. So think before each meeting, what's 1 or 2 things. Challenge yourself to speak up at least once or twice. When I say it's not personal, one of the things you can do to enhance performance development is to focus on specific situations. Bring people to a specific example that they can relate to. Don't do the all or nothing, you never or you always. If you've ever been in marital therapy, you know that's a no-no. But be clear on what behaviors are going to drive success, and if possible, understand what that employee's goals are and try and link the opportunity to that goal. So, hey, Jane, I know that you're interested in, being considered for that executive level role that's coming up in the next month or 2. And I think one thing that you could do to, be considered for that is to show more executive presence. To really sort of be more confident and bold in some of the statements that you make. So help them link the opportunity or the behaviors that you want to see to something that they care about. All right. The only other thing I'll say here is that when it comes to positive, just thinking back to when I talked about balance between positive and negative feedback, the other point to make is that the positive feedback helps to build up your bank account. So if you really have a chance to catch people doing well and acknowledging them and sharing what they're doing well, you're going to have more in your bank account in terms of trust and goodwill with that relationship, so that you can, when needed, use the bank account by giving constructive feedback. All right. So as we close here, I want you to think about picture a pit crew at a racing event. And a lot of times these pit stops are about 13 seconds each. And these pit stops are kind of what I envision as the picture of a high-performing team. And what are they really doing that sort of helps them to perform on a high level? Each person has a role, and there's clarity in what that role is and what's expected of them. They know what their priorities are. They all know what they're supposed to do. Helps them to work together most effectively and collaborate. They know they can rely on each other. And there's clearly a lot of communication that leads up to this in order to make this happen. And there's a lot of practice. They do it regularly so that in the moment when it matters, they can perform. And I think this relates to all the sort of aspects of or ingredients around performance development. If you're clarifying roles, if communication is frequent and clear and consistent, and there's sort of a sense of trust and collaboration, then everybody performs at a higher level. I thank you very much for your time today, and I'm certainly open to answering questions, specifics around, performance development and any sort of challenges or issues in your organization, and we're always happy to talk to you about that here at TalentQuest. We certainly have some great tools to help automate that process and make it easier for you on a big scale, as well as consulting solutions to help you sort of customize things to work for your company. All right.
Thank you so much, Adrianne.
Welcome.
Great presentation. We hope everyone's found this extremely useful. We do have a question for you.
All right.
I'll go ahead and read it. It says, there has been a lot of recent press about companies doing away with the formal annual review process. For companies not quite ready to completely do away with a once-a-year formal review, what sort of advice or guidance would you give to HR professionals who are trying to bridge the gap between the C-suite, what the C-suite wants, say that 3 times fast, and what employees would prefer?
Yeah, well, I sort of started talking a little bit about this when I was talking about best practices, the container store, et cetera. And yes, there's a lot of hype around doing away with performance management, sort of really changing it. But the reality is, when you dig a bit and you look at the companies that are doing that, what's really happening is they're doing more rather than less. So they're finding ways to incorporate feedback into their process much more frequently, and taking a little bit of the emphasis off of ratings, and revisiting goals on a more frequent basis to make sure that they're the right goals to be focused on. So I think that's so some of the things that you can do to start sort of moving in that direction are to maybe revisit your goals, on a quarterly basis as opposed to semi-annually or annually. Make sure they're the right goals and everyone's focused on the right things. And also maybe provide some feedback training to your managers on how to incorporate feedback into their daily work with folks and how to give good feedback and make it count. So those 2 things I think would be the strongest recommendations to help you move in that direction. Training for your managers around feedback and coaching, and more regular check-ins on sort of goals and things like that. All right. Any other questions, Gina?
Right now, no. So I'm going to go, well, one just popped up as I said no. So
okay.
Let me go right ahead here. I've heard quite a bit about regular performance feedback versus annual or biannual feedback. What are your thoughts?
Probably repeating myself a bit. I think that it's very important. As I mentioned, it's sort of silly to think about a 1-hour discussion being able to sort of provide guidance and balance and clarity for an employee's 2,080 hours, of course, across the course of the year. I think regular feedback encourages that the employee is doing the right things. It provides for a stronger relationship between the employee and the company, and the employee and the manager. It enhances engagement, and better ideas, I think, come from better communication. Feedback is communication. So certainly encourage companies finding ways to make it part of their everyday.
And with that, I don't see any additional questions. So I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone so much for their time today. We appreciate you spending the last hour with us. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any additional questions or if you'd like more information.
All right. A recording of this webinar will be available coming up very soon, and you'll see the SHRM code there on the screen in case you're applying for CEs for this presentation. And thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.